Good morning and welcome to this third and final day of the Clingendael State of the Union Conference. My name is Adriaan Schout. I'm the EU expert here at Clingendael and I'm Professor European Public Administration at the Radboud University in Nijmegen. And I have the honor to chair this next session, or the first session for today on the Euro. And the title of this session is, Are we moving towards a narrative of solidity and solidarity for the Euro? If we talk about the Euro, the narrative, the two components are solidity and solidarity. But have we seen over the past 25 years the development of solidity and solidarity? Is this actually the narrative that we are turning into? I have the honor to chair this, and I'll do that together with my colleague Luuk Molthof. He will follow the Q&A sessions. Everybody who's on Zoom, underneath you have the button for Q&A, and Luuk will monitor the Q&A, and he makes sure that your questions and comments and feedback, whatever you want to say, will be included in our discussions as much as possible. Unfortunately, the viewers on YouTube cannot use the Q&A, evidently. Preparing for this session, it struck me how difficult it is to actually combine the discussions on the Euro that we're so used to about the instruments, the governance, with the narrative of the Euro. How do we also bring the public on board? The problem with the Euro is that if we do not ensure that the public understands what we're doing and why we're doing it, that the public may actually have the feeling of that we're in a process of integration by stealth, or that the public doesn't realize what measures, what sometimes painful measures, are also involved in being member of the Euro. And that can be related to solidarity or to solidity reforms. Just to set the scene, let me just briefly touch upon a few items that are at stake at the moment, just to see that the Euro is really in a sort of sensitive phase. First of all, our monitoring mechanisms are shelved. The Stability and Growth Pact is parked for a couple of years, has to be restarted, has to be reformed. The ESM at the moment doesn't function. Will it ever start again the way it was designed? We have topped up the EU budget with the Recovery and Resilience Facility, almost a doubling of the EU budget. Is that a one-off measure, or is this a step to a fiscal capacity? Moreover, we have countries with high debt. Will we reduce the debt? But we also have to invest in greening, digital transformation, defense union. So we need a lot of money at the national and the European level. How do we combine that with debts? Do we need Eurobonds for that? Is the RRF a step towards Eurobonds? And if we have Eurobonds, how do we repay them? There are many other questions also that we need to address here, for which we don't have the time, but this already shows we're almost on the doorstep of a deepening of the Euro. Or are we? To discuss these questions, I'm very happy that we have a first-class panel here this morning, people who combine a lot of national experience with European expertise at the same time. Just in alphabetical order, we have Maria Demertzis. She's Deputy Director at Bruegel, and she's from Greece, and she's also active in the media in Greece and the political discussions on the EU and the Euro. Secondly, we have Daniel Gros. Daniel Gros is was the director of the Center for European Policy Studies in Brussels, and very happy because he's also the one of the founding fathers of the euro, because he was member of the Delors Committee writing the famous One Market, One Money report that started more or less the euro as we know it. Third panelist is Lex Hoogduin. Lex Hoogduin from the Netherlands was executive director at the Dutch Central Bank. And in that capacity, he participated in many ECB meetings and the governance council of the ECB. And he's currently professor in Groningen. And as all our panels of the State of the Union conference from Clingendael, we combine our experts with a practitioner, and we're very happy that Michel Heijdra, the deputy treasurer from the Ministry of Finance and alternate board member of the ESM, will join this discussion and give his feedback on the discussions in the panel. So that's the panel, that's the roadmap. Let me start with Danielle Gros. Danielle, I already said you were one of the founding fathers of the euro. You were there when it really started and writing on this famous report. What were your expectations that the euro would deliver? And how do you look back on those expectations?
Yeah, good morning. It's a pleasure to participate in this discussion. You're right to emphasize the crucial importance of the narratives. Now, what were the expectations? In one sentence, it was one market, one money. And namely, the feeling at the time was that if you really wanted to unify the European market, the internal market, then one needed one currency to make prices more transparent for consumers and increase competition across countries. And the second expectation had to do with the biggest macroeconomic problem at the time, namely inflation. The analysis of the time was that inflation came about because in some countries at least, central banks were not credible, and therefore trade unions asked for high wage increases, which then the central bank had to validate if it didn't want to have very high unemployment rates. And the idea of creating the euro was that if we had one common European central bank dedicated to price stability, all these credibility problems would disappear, and countries like Italy or Spain would get price stability. And on top of that, they would actually get also more growth. So this seemed like a very good bargain. Mainly, finally, if you allow me, not an expectation, but there was a very strong feeling at the time that there was no alternative, or rather, that the alternative to going towards a common currency was an increased German hegemony, monetary hegemony over the entire European Union. Because, and that people have to keep in mind, when the Maastricht Treaty was concluded, that was also the time when finally Italy, France, Spain lifted the controls on capitals, which they had until then. So this double coincidence of wanting to fight inflation, having to lift capital controls, that made it imperative to find a different monetary arrangement for Europe. And we thought at the time that having a common currency would have economic benefits and also politically, because it would somehow dilute German hegemony.
Okay, thank you. As regards to German expectations, because you're also a German, what about the assessment of the risks of the euro? How was that then and how is it now? Did people see the risks of the euro? Were they comfortable about that? And how are the risks assessed at the moment for the euro?
At the time, of course, the fear in Germany was that the common currency and the common central bank would not be as credibly inflation fighters as the Bundesbank, and there would be more inflation. People thought, oh God, let's assume we get an Italian central bank president. What will happen then, right? Little did they know that things would turn out differently. What was not appreciated at the time was that it is often impossible to separate the fiscal from the monetary aspects. And that dawned upon the German public only later with the Greek and then the sovereign debt crisis in the euro area. And since the German public hadn't been told about that, then they started to ask, what does it mean? We thought we just put a common central bank here which has a common monetary policy, but we didn't bargain for also having Eurobonds. And that's why the reaction initially to the ESM and other plans was very hostile.
Have the politicians in Germany explained sufficiently the risks involved of the euro? For example, there are transfers, I assume, at the moment from Germany to, let's say, Greece. Are these risks accepted by the German public, and are the politicians clear about the financial risks that the Germans, the taxpayers, are running?
Now, at the time the euro was created, the German public was not made aware of the risk. It was just told, look here, we're getting a risk to have more inflation with the European Central Bank, but it's worth it for the sake of European integration. Nobody thought at the time that there would be a risk of transfers. And right now, actually, I mean, you're talking about transfers. When the loans to Greece were made, people thought that's money lost. And therefore was a strong reaction also with the AfD and others. But today, people are quite relaxed because they're seeing that Greece will actually most probably repay the loans, and they don't see any transfers. So that's why there has been this ups and downs. At the beginning, fear of inflation didn't materialize. Then in around 1910, 12, fear of transfers to Greece and other countries. And now it seems that these transfers don't materialize because the countries are repaying their loans. So that's why the discussion has really calmed down a lot.
Are you suggesting that the risks of the euro, the financial transfers, are swept under the carpet in Germany?
The risks were not seen by, I think, anybody at the beginning. They were then very much at the top of the public discussion. And now people just get bored because they see nothing is happening. The risks may continue to exist, but they're not materializing. And for the time being, they seem quite remote.
Not swept under the carpet. The German elections. Do we see, let's put it differently, if a country runs into difficulties, will, because of high debt levels, whatever, but there's always a next crisis. Will Germany change towards a country that will be more lenient to countries running into difficulty? We saw the Greek crisis. Germany was the villain, more or less. Is that pattern, has that now left? Is Germany now more on the side of fiscal capacity, euro bonds, and saving the euro, paying for it?
I mean, as you said earlier, solidity and solidarity. But I think in Germany, the solidarity applies to the EU, to European integration, not so much to the euro, more narrowly defined. And of course, here we come again to the narrative which you emphasize. The narrative for the Greek crisis, as you know, and Maria can talk about that later, was very much they cheated. It's their problem, right? They cheated and overspent. Right now, it's very different. So I think you can count on German solidarity for crises or problems which are at least perceived not to be the making of the own, not the own responsibility of the countries concerned. But I think they will continue to be very tough if there's a perception that the problem came about because the country overspent in the past.
So I note solidarity with the EU, not solidarity with the euro. Okay, that's an important one, Danielle. But one thing about price stability. Do we have price stability in the next 2 years?
I think actually a good thing that you say 2 years. If you take the inflation rate and don't measure it over the last 12 months, because there we have a temporary low point, but if you measure inflation over 24 months, so basically we build a bridge over the corona crisis. Then if you look at that in Europe, or in the euro area at least, inflation, the core inflation rate is completely flat, right? So we now have over 12 months measured a hiccup, but that will disappear over the next year because that is a very temporary thing due to the corona crisis last year. So I think we'll have price stability. We might have a problem with housing because, of course, with extra low interest rates, then house prices go up. Rent also go up with a time lag. And the big problem is that the ECB has not, or the ECB is not including the cost of owner-occupied housing in its calculation of the inflation rate. If it did so, we would have a somewhat higher inflation rate. It would still not be very large, would still be around 2%. But if we were to include housing, we would be at a point now where inflation reaches 2%.
Okay. So actually, limited solidarity, at least not with the euro, but with the EU, and pretty much stability at the moment in the eurozone. A happy German.
And nice growth on top of it.
Okay, thank you, Danielle. Who sits to Maria. Maria, can I see you? Hi, Maria.
Hi.
We have Germany. Although you're living and breathing in the EU institutions and in Brussels, in the Brussels bubble, you're also very active in Greece, and you know the situation very well. The start for Greece was not uncontested. Why did Greece wanted to join the euro? Because for itself, it might have been better not to do it. What was the fundamental reason? What is the soul of Greece that it wanted to join?
Yeah, thanks very much, Adriaan. It was great to be there, even if not in person. So if you allow me, I would like to go back to why did Greece want to join the EU in order to come to why did it want to join the euro. I think there is, because the things are a continuity, so they're not separate, although there are different reasons for wanting one versus the other. For Greece, participation in the EU has always been about anchoring. So belonging to an alliance. It's an alliance that is going to help Greece reform in a particular way. This was the motivation behind 1981 when Greece joined the EU. So for Greece, the anchoring is crucial because one of the biggest problems that Greece has to this day is the issue of security. Security for the geographical security is absolutely essential. So being part of a bigger group that even if it doesn't have defense in its own portfolio is a sense of belonging. You belong to a certain club, and that provides the security that is absolutely crucial for the Greek soul. Now, moving into the eurozone, why did Greece want to join the euro? Daniel mentioned the two things. First of all, we needed the euro to promote the single market. That part was less relevant to Greece because Greece, certainly back then, less, a little bit more now, back then was not an exporting nation. So this idea of being able to export more or get or import more in stable prices was not so much the motivation. But the other reason that Diane mentioned, which was the inflationary reason, was very much the motivation why the average Greek person, and therefore the political elite, would want Greece to join the euro, and that is price stability. Greece was a very big inflationary country. It had bad institutions. To some extent, it still does, but it's reforming in that respect. So participating in the euro would provide stability, which for the average Greek person was very, very beneficial. So that was actually a very big part of why the average Greek person would want to be in the euro. And I would like to say that this narrative, because that is really the narrative why Greeks want to be part of the whole architecture, is still very much the case in Greece today, and it has been tested. It was tested in 2015 with the referendum, where one question was asked, but the real question that was being verified was whether you want to be part of the euro or not. And even those people who voted against the question that was asked, we were never giving a mandate to the government to exit the euro. So the Greek person is convinced that they want to be part of the union of the euro. Now, what was not discussed at the time, and that discussion has come with a 20-year delay, is that if you're going to be part of that euro, you need to reform. Otherwise, there's going to be issues. And we saw the issues. They appeared as advantages at the beginning, so an immediate decline of interest rates. As soon as the Greek drachma was transformed into the euro, we had a convergence of the interest rates, which was unprecedented. And actually, as it turned out, very detrimental to Greece, even though we thought this was a good thing because it made everything much easier. The reduction of the interest rates, and certainly the speed at which the interest rates were reduced, proved detrimental, the cost of which, of course, materialized in 2010. So that part of the discussion that was absolutely necessary to have happened before entry to the euro did not happen back then. And it's happening now with a delay of about 20 years, but it is happening. And hopefully we will see the important reforms that are needed for Greece to be able to sustain its membership in the euro.
Was it a failure of the political level to actually tell the public what is at stake with the euro, that reforms have to be made, or was it just a lack of intellectual awareness that people thought it was a free ride, or we all underestimated it? What explains this, that we need a fundamental crisis before the seriousness and the reform need sinks in?
Well, I mean, who is the writer of narratives? Is it just the political elite that does that? I don't think so. I mean, I think there is a broader responsibility there. The discussion, the arguments behind the need of reform are always there. The arguments behind more political union, behind economic union, were always there before the introduction of the euro. It didn't happen because it was a difficult thing to happen. And I don't know that Greece was in the position to think about the need for reform. Politically, it would have been very difficult to sell because, you know, reforms come at a cost. But I dare say that I think in the whole of the EU and those countries that did enter the eurozone in 2099, and I think Daniel actually mentioned this as well, the discussion on what the euro really means about the increase of interdependencies between countries, that didn't happen. It's not a discussion about transfers. Transfer is the outcome of the interdependencies. But what I think was not discussed between countries is that the moment you lock yourselves into a monetary system, namely the euro, you increase interdependencies. And you cannot argue that problems that happen somewhere else don't concern you, because they do. We saw that in as you said, in the Greek crisis, a problem that was fundamentally a Greek problem actually transferred into the whole of Union. Economically speaking, Greece is a very small unit of the European Union and of the euro area, and yet problems that were entirely Greek problems transferred into the whole of euro. That is an interdependence. And that discussion, the discussion that problems elsewhere will matter for domestic discussions as well, that's not something that became clear. Transfers is the result of these interdependencies. That's the discussion that never really happened. It was just in Greece. I think in the context of the eurozone, these were not really discussed at the start of the architecture.
You've already mentioned briefly that the convergence is happening at the moment. You said Greece is reforming. My question from what you're saying is there's something different with Danielle. Danielle started with one market, one money. It's the market. It's the efficiency argument. It's the economic argument. Whereas you started with the security element of Greece and being part of a bigger group. And then you also mentioned inflation, but you emphasized the political aspect. Do you think, personally understanding sort of the northern and the southern vision so well, do you think we think too lightly, too much economically about the euro in the northern countries?
Well, I think there is an element of not appreciating what really the common currency means in terms of political support. I think there is an element there, and that discussion of the interdependencies. I use that word because I think it's important to understand the economic links that arise that require political support for them to be part of the daily discussions. Why should economic problems in Greece matter, let's say, in the Finnish debates? Well, they matter because they affect the credibility of the euro. But in order to be addressed that, you have to go beyond the economics and say that it has to be a political narrative that comes in and says, look, if you really want the euro to support, to exist, to be basically to overlive us, we need to do other things that are going to support it. And it's I think naive to believe that the euro is going to be contained, given what we've seen in the past 20 years, the crisis, the use of fiscal outcomes, now we even have a common debt. Do you really think that we can have a euro surviving without having these discussions? But let's have them sincerely so that the public understands what interdependencies we have gotten into.
The frugal countries, do they realize this enough? Are the frugals a danger in a way to this collective identity of the euro?
I think we have frugal people in the panel. I think we should ask them to tell us. I don't know that I would like to speak for them. I think there is certainly debates that need to happen, and not just on the North-South divide, the East-West divide. That is actually perhaps in some ways even more fundamental because it goes beyond economics. These are important discussions that we need to have. And in particular, if we have in mind a successful euro in the future, because without a successful political narrative that we all agree upon, or at least a minimum denominator, I think that it will be putting the euro into danger.
Okay, thank you, Maria. Maria already mentioned that we have a frugal in the panel. I think that might apply to the next panelist, Lex Hoogduin, from the Netherlands, former executive director from the Netherlands, the Nederlandse Bank, the Dutch Central Bank, and now professor in Groningen. Welcome, Lex. For you, the question, the Dutch were the really proud founders of the euro. It was the Maastricht Treaty. I was in Maastricht at the time. We were absolutely proud and pro-European and convinced that this was the right way, and we needed a federal euro too. Now we are seen as a frugal country, as the leader of the frugal even. When did that turn happen, and why?
Yeah, thank you, Adriaan. Also a pleasure for me to be here on this panel. Unfortunately, not yet in person, but certainly second best. Let me go back a little bit further in time than where you started. The Netherlands was not only, let's say, the proud founder of the euro in a way, but was also, of course, among the founding fathers of the European economic community, with as big idea, creating of a peaceful and prosperous Europe after the Second World War. Trade in a way as a insurance for peace, and trade for the Netherlands is without a doubt anyway very important as an open economy. So what we have seen, almost a logic of step-by-step further integration and stable exchange rates and price stabilities are essential for a single market and for trade in general. And that's also why the Netherlands, after the demise of the Bretton Woods system, very quickly moved to an informal peg to the German D-mark, seen as the most stable currency in Europe. And then we had, I take big steps, but then we had the German unification, and very quickly followed by the tensions in the ERM in 1992, 1993, and that made, in a way, the euro, the establishment of a common currency, inevitable. But it should be done on, let's say, German terms. Germany having been the leader of a zone of stability, it should be done German terms, and the ECB, the European Central Bank, should be, as much as possible, become a kind of a copy of the successful Bundesbank, and the euro should become as strong as the German mark. And so, on the basis of that, what we needed was an independent central bank with price stability as its primary objective. In the Dutch view, the euro should only be introduced after having met the so-called convergence criteria. I don't have to go into that, but we know which they are, and fiscal discipline was of paramount importance for a sustainable common currency. Convergence had to take place, but not to the average, but to the best performing country or countries in the euro area. So baked in should be what I would call an asymmetric adjustment process. No bailout clause, very important, and no monetary financing of government debts and deficits. So that was basically the view or the narrative, if you may.
Now, what went wrong?
Sorry?
Now, what went wrong? Where did it go wrong?
What went wrong? And now let
the Netherlands derail.
Let me take a big step towards, let's say, 2011, 2012. If you look back from that perspective, it was a remarkable success in terms of the primary objective, price stability. If you, Jean-Claude Trichet, I recall at that time, almost every press conference calculated the average inflation rate of the euro since its inception had been close to, but just below 2%. And so it was in that terms, the primary objective to create price stability was very successful. And we should also keep in mind that the Bundesbank, seen as the most successful central bank after the Second World War, during its existence, had achieved an average inflation rate of 3%. So in a sense, the euro had done better, and the ECB had done better than the ECB. If you look from that narrow perspective, even if during that period you could debate, to put it mildly, whether the convergence criteria were met in practice. So that's, and then I think for me there's a very important tipping point around 2011, 2012. And to put it mildly, or to put it concisely, the euro crisis and also recently the corona crisis have put pressure, let's say, on that story, on that narrative that I pointed out in broad terms. The ECB has fallen into a debt trap. There's no price stability according to the ECB's own definitions and ambitions since 2013, 2014. There has been massive QE, which I think, if we look back at it in 10, 15 years' time, has been monetary financing of deficits. This will not be reversed. That's highly unlikely. We have much too high public debts. We have seen both after the euro crisis and also after the corona crisis, we see a slower recovery in the euro area than in other Western countries. We have seen what I would call an erosion of the no bailout clause, and I would say we are not discussing, let's say, the EC narrative, the narrative of the European Commission, but what I've seen is that what I observed, that the narrative has been changing. Has been.
Is there a Dutch narrative at the moment? Is there a Dutch narrative at the moment?
No, let me first say a little bit what let's say what happened in the outside world, because I think that's important. There's now an emphasis on strategic autonomy. So that's one thing. We have far-reaching ambitions, common ambitions, climate policy, digitization. I think the official narrative is that the crisis of the financial crisis and the euro crisis have told us that the euro is not, that the EMU is not completed. It should be completed. Whereas if you look at it from the, let's say, the Dutch narrative, you would say what the crisis in 2010 has told us, that the convergence criteria are no longer met, that there is a need for renewed convergence rather than completing EMU. And that's a very different way of looking at it. We have seen, you refer to that in your introduction, that there is a feeling that the budgetary criteria have to be reviewed, have to be revised as a much more relaxed attitude towards the budgetary criteria. So what we have seen in the Netherlands, the question that you asked after 2011, 2012 is, I would say, a kind of a polarization in positions. There's a sizable minority, a very vocal minority, who have turned anti-EU, and then there is a group of people who have become more skeptical, critical, and then I think there's also a group that starts to move in the changing narrative. But there's a lack of a kind of a.
There's not a combining narrative. We've lost our anchors. If that's.
Yeah, I think at the time of the euro introduction, I think it was not the type of enthusiasm that you pointed out. That there were. I think Europe and further European integration step by step. It was almost logical. Nobody really debated it, apart from a small group of economists who were somewhat worried. But it was not a public. It was not a really public discussion, and therefore selling the euro to the Dutch people wasn't on the basis of this narrative. It was more on terms of efficiency, and it was so handy that you didn't need to change your currency traveling in Europe and that type of things.
Can I ask you a question? You spoke about price stability, and Daniel Gros also spoke about price stability. Daniel, I think the price stability is not an issue at the moment. We have a bit of a hiccup, but then everything will be fine. How do you look at the price stability at the moment?
Yeah, I'm far less relaxed. I must say I think we have to realize that at the moment the ECB is running a very loose monetary policy already for quite some time. And
what is the danger?
Sorry?
What is the danger?
Where
we will see the danger? What are the results? Prices are stable, interests are low.
Yeah, so the danger is that this will change. That there is a nobody can know for sure that this is temporary. Not even Daniel, not even the ECB itself. That there is a possibility that it is not temporary. There's also, if you look at the longer term trends, have caused this stable inflation, that these trends will reverse, that aging will become an inflationary force rather than a deflationary force. There is a lot of liquidity into the system. Interest rates are very low, so if the inflationary pressures are more persistent than expected, there's no way for the ECB to be able to damp these pressures without having to raise interest rates to levels which threaten financial stability, and that's the issue. And it is true that inflation has been low for the past few years, but as a result of that, there are byproducts of that policy.
If there is a
so that's not a threat, but that's already a problem.
I think what you're describing could
so
be more or less.
For the Netherlands mood, these low interest rates have caused problems. It's not the only factor, but it's a very important factor, I think. Have caused problems in our housing markets. There's a huge shortage of houses. House prices increase on an annual basis already quite a number of years in double-digit numbers. Our pension system is in great trouble, and wealth inequality is growing by the day.
I think your concerns are clear. I think we could maybe also term it stagflation, just to use a technical term. Does the EU, does the eurozone still have the instruments to deal with the next crisis? A next crisis will always come. You mentioned some components. We have indebted countries, increasing prices, interest rates. Will the euro survive the next crisis? Do we have the instruments?
I think it may survive a next crisis, but after every crisis so far, it has been kicking the can down the road. So I think the role of monetary policy in combating a next crisis will be very limited, if at all. There's no way that monetary policy can further stimulate economies, given the level where interest rates are now, given the size of the QE programs already, and I don't see, let's say, any appetite for really wanting to stop those policies, because very different from the past, where you say, well, we have to be ahead of the curve. You don't want to see inflation in the eyes before you react. You have to react. You have to anticipate. Now the story has totally reversed. First, wait and see until inflation comes in the projections over a three-year period, and then being happy only if it then, after that period, you also expect it to continue.
Max, I'll have to stop you because we're running out of time. Thank you very much. We have three different colors on the state of the euro at the moment and how we look at it from national perspectives. I'd like to bring in Michel Heijdra, Deputy Treasurer General from the Ministry of Finance, also in the board of the ESM. Michel, you're negotiating in Brussels almost on a daily basis about the state of the euro and about eurozone reforms. What are your comments? What have you seen in the three discussions we've had so far?
Thank you, Adriaan, and thank you to all the previous speakers. It's a pleasure to be here. I think what I've seen is three different ways to describe the narrative behind the euro from a historical perspective and where we are now. And I think it was in Daniel's presentation already that he also focused a bit on the distinction between the Eurozone and the EU. And if I look at the current situation, what we see is that the debate is focused more on the EU dimension than on the Eurozone dimension. And the Eurozone discussion, also the Eurogroup agenda is almost empty. And the subject of deepening EMU is more or less at a standstill currently. And the discussion had usually a few pillars. The ESM reform, well, the ESM reform is currently being finalized in parliamentary procedures. There was a discussion on the banking union, which lacked its final pillar, a European DGS, which is probably needed also from a symbolic or integration perspective. But a real question is whether that is absolutely needed to safeguard financial stability. And there were discussions on the fiscal capacity, both at the European level versus domestic national fiscal capacities. So then I'm referring to the SCP discussion. And what you see is, in a way, that this debate has now moved to the EU instead of the Eurozone. And the next generation EU is a European package instead of a Eurozone package. Although a lot of commenters have said, yeah, this package was primarily meant for some highly indebted Eurozone countries, yet it was a collective EU enterprise, and also a lot of the Eastern European countries benefited from it. So we see the narrative shifting a bit from the Eurozone to the EU, even in a discussion which was typically a few years ago about the Eurozone, such as about unemployment insurance, actually moved in this COVID crisis to the EU level with the so-called SURE instrument, which allows member states to get loans from the European Union budget to support unemployment schemes. And why is that? That is the one word that we haven't heard yet, and that is Brexit. In a way, the UK polarized the European Union and the Eurozone much more strongly against each other, much more strongly the market and the EU as a single market versus the Eurozone, where the Brits didn't want to pay anything for the troubles within the Eurozone. Now, also because of the typical shock that COVID has been, an external shock that fell outside of the responsibility of an individual member state. I think integration steps have been taken, but more at the EU level. It's of course a question what will happen in the near future. I think the fact that 90% of the economic GDP is more or less concentrated in the Eurozone, or 85, something like that, will mean that the Eurozone and the EU will collide much more strongly than with the EU outside of with the UK still inside the European Union. But that doesn't mean that all Eurozone problems have been solved. And my Minister of Finance always used to say that it's a tragedy that countries like Norway, Sweden, Denmark, Switzerland, say the strongest countries in the European Union, or Norway, even outside the European Union and Switzerland, don't want to join the EU and don't want to join the Euro. Whereas we see that more vulnerable countries like Bulgaria or Croatia are now joining EMU. So it will be a different composition in the future, where some of the strongest members will stay outside and some others will join, as is their obligation according to the EU treaties. And the question is, when will potential troubles in the Eurozone return to the front stage? And I think it can take quite some years, as long as a monetary policy remains accommodative, and the narrative also seems to be focused on different issues. But they may pop up again, and then some of the instruments have been revised. I mean, there is now a common resolution fund. There is now an ESM with more tools, but it's a real question whether we are sufficiently prepared to a potential new Eurozone crisis in the future. And what we've done at the Netherlands is, instead of a single narrative, we've set up a committee and it has actually developed 4 different narratives. Lex was on that committee on how to see future integration within the EU and the eurozone.
Thank you. Tempting to pose a question to you about Commission supervision, and when the supervision with the Stability and Growth Pact, the semester, the Commission, as well as the ESM, when they will come back. But I'll park that question. Luuk, can we turn to the Q&A session? What are the questions? Any feedback?
We can, Adriaan. There have been posed quite a few questions, actually. So I'm trying to sort through the most interesting ones. Let's maybe start with the question from Joris Melman. And he's asking, a couple of panelists mentioned the importance of involving the public in explaining the euro's consequences and the choices it entails. Which actor should do this? And is it even really possible to explain the euro's often complex technicalities to a broader audience in a way that leads to a useful public debate?
So how to get a better public debate on the euro?
Indeed.
On the euro. Let me put that to the entire panel. One of you four. What is the debate that we need to have in the EU on the eurozone on strengthening, and who should we have that debate or just wait for the next crisis? And who would be the actor to initiate that debate? Should that be part of the future conference? Should it be the President of the European Council, the Commission? Is this a sort of macro level question of a narrative debate that we should avoid and keep it practical? What do you think about the debate? Who can I give the floor?
Let's start.
Danielle, please.
To be honest, I'm an elitist. The euro was an elite project, and I think it's just not possible to somehow order a debate. The public will get interested when there are problems to be solved. Of course, at that point, it has to be explained. I don't think it's part of the job of the European institutions to initiate that debate, which is very national, unavoidably. And therefore, I would say we have just to show how the euro deals with problems as they arise, and just trying to foster debate when there is no problem to be solved, no visible problem to be solved, I think is going to remain very, very difficult.
Maybe I should add something that from the findings that I've seen from polls, because you can do polls and look at what the public looks at, and there are worries about pensions, there are worries about house pricing. It's not always linked to the ECB, but there is a sort of impression, at least in the Netherlands, that it wouldn't be bad if we would have a stronger euro and maybe a split between North and South. So there is a worry about it. Some other from the panel is, can we initiate that debate? Should we initiate it? Or shall we follow Danielle's technocratic elitist approach? Maria, I see you raise your eyebrows.
Yeah, it's we touched on this question actually a bit earlier on when we said who actually writes the narratives in countries, and I don't think you can initiate a commission to write a narrative. I think the narrative is something that is historical, and a lot of players come in. But I think there is scope for things to do. First of all, we need to have very strong institution nationally, because think about the freedom of the press. If you don't have a press that is actually doing its job properly, how are you going to initiate a discussion in a country? So freedom of the press. I also believe in education, a very good education, and aiming to educate people at all levels about the goods and bads of things. There will be the European project is a difficult project to communicate to the public, because the public will always worry about domestic issues when some of the problems and the solutions to that we need have to come from bigger bodies. dare I say, even global bodies. Think of the pandemic. So, you know, that problem will always be there, the difficulty of having to solve problems domestically, but initiate solutions that go beyond the nation. I mean, you know, the only thing you can do is inform and make sure you don't have fake news, make sure you have, you know, big institutions, but that needs to happen, and actually stop bad information and misinformation when it happens, because it could be very, very destructive in terms of trying addressing these issues. So balanced opinions, balanced analysis, all of these things you can help advance, but it cannot be just the one person or the Future of Europe conference that instigates the narrative that we need for the future.
Any further thoughts, Luuk? Well, I must say on this, I'm from a country where we had two referenda and they both failed. And it turned out that the public was more critical than we expected. So there is a bit of a worry underneath, behind the question. Luuk.
Yes, Adriaan. There is another question from Joost Koelman. And he's asking the following question. The creation of the euro seems to have been premised on the expectation of convergence within the euro area. Have we in fact not seen divergence instead? And if so, what can or should be done about it?
I think that's a very important question. A narrative should be built around solidarity and solidity. Did we see convergence or do we see divergence? And what can we do about it? And is it even the problem? Quite a big theme. Lex, I see you laughing. Yes.
Yeah, I think the answer is yes. As explained earlier, we thought that convergence is essential, and not convergence only at the moment that you join the euro area, but on a permanent basis. What we have seen at the start, you could debate whether indeed the conversion was already sufficient. But as I said in my introduction, after the euro crisis and the financial crisis, it's clear that we had the criteria are no longer met, and we see rather divergence than convergence. Is this a problem? Yes, in my view, because these criteria are necessary criteria for a sustainable euro. So something should be done about it, and there are different ways of addressing them or not addressing them, and hoping for the best. And addressing them can be setting up programs for renewed convergence. I would say in combination with looking at the criteria, the fiscal criteria themselves. So I would be against now revising the fiscal criteria if you go this road as it were in isolation. I think it should be combined with ensuring that debt levels and deficit levels move in a direction that contribute to the sustainability of the euro and make a future crisis less likely. So you can do that in several ways, depending on your, let's say, vision of Europe. You could take steps to further fiscal integration, moving to euro bonds, starting to stabilize national debt levels, for instance. But you could also think about other ways of doing it. I think my concern is that the issue will not be addressed, will be parked, as it were, and that let's say combating a next crisis or increasing investments for instance, climate policy will be done by having a series of temporary funds like the recovery and fund. It's now been set up. That will, I think it's inevitable.
Can you orchestrate convergence?
No, that will be continued. But now I'm going further than the question was.
Yes, thank you. You're pleading for continuations or the of the RRF. Can you orchestrate? And then I'll turn to Danielle, Alex. Can you brief answer, please? Can you orchestrate convergence, or should you actually let the market forces run their course?
No, I think it should be. Of course, you can leave that to the market, but then that market will not do that in a smooth way. So I think you should ideally you should have, as I said, you should have a program of moving in the right direction.
Danielle, speaking truth to power, when it comes to convergence and divergence, which country should we be worried about?
First of all, what do we mean by convergence? When I hear that question, I immediately think about convergence in income per capita, right? Which is a very different story. And there we have had textbook convergence within the EU. Most Eastern European countries are converging nicely. They're experiencing higher growth rate. And we had some, let's say, some divergence within the euro area, right? In income per capita. That's a very different issue. I see a colleague wants to have a two-hander, I don't know.
No, but I want you to speak truth to power and mention where are problems over convergence and divergence in the eurozone. You know, ranks and names.
One step at a time. As I said, what do you mean by convergence? Income per capita or debt to the GDP ratios? Very different pair of shoes.
Okay, Maria was first. Here's a question.
Yeah, but I'm very curious to hear Lex's two-hander, though.
Okay, Lex.
Yeah, I had a two-hander because indeed I wanted to answer Daniel's question. What do you mean by convergence?
Exactly.
What I mean by convergence is simply the convergence criteria as they are in the treaty as the basis for a sustainable EMU. And I think. In the context of an already established euro area, there are two in particular in my mind. The first is the fiscal criteria. We know what they are. Then you have in the convergence criteria, you have the real exchange rate criteria, which let's say once you are in the euro area translates into a competitiveness criterion. And I think in both for both criteria, I don't think you need a long discussion to see which countries are not meeting the criteria and which countries in particular are not meeting the criteria. Let me just pick out Italy. Italy is stagnating in terms of competitiveness since the inception of the euro, and has a government debt of going in the direction of 160% of GDP. So that is the first is a problem for Italy itself. To start with, but very much echoing what Maria said, this is also a problem for the rest of the euro area, for the rest of the EU, and actually it's a problem for the world economy if this goes wrong. So these are.
Danielle, is it only Italy, or are there other countries in the medium term that you would be worried about whether debt is sustainable compared to growth levels?
Well, of course, Greece is a special case, but I leave that to Maria. I think I would worry also countries like France, where in successive stages, whenever there's a problem, the answer is more deficit spending, and that ratchets leads to ratcheting up effect in terms of debt to GDP ratio. So in that sense, on the fiscal side, I would worry about a lot of countries, including, of course, Italy. But let me just add, the key issue is, and that perhaps something that Maria can answer, how can we make sure that the fiscal problems of any country remain the problem of that country and do not spill over to the rest? That is, I think, the key question, because in that case, we can stop worrying about convergence and just say, it's your problem. And that would be, for me, the ideal EMU, not so much that the center forces every country to have the same fiscal policy, but that we are in a situation where every country, if it has a problem, it has only a problem for itself and doesn't create a problem for the others.
Maria, that would be a great answer if you would have it.
Exactly, that's right. That's right. But I say it is the core of the problem, actually. That how do you ensure that? And this is why we need to have a conversation of what interdependencies actually mean. I think that and that comes back to some of the issues I think that Lex raised as well. This issue of the rationale behind the Maastricht criteria of fiscal discipline. They were real and they were very important, and they're still valid. It's important that we understand that fiscal discipline needs to be there. Otherwise, you have the spillover effects, which are, of course, very, very detrimental. We've seen this. However, we have to sort of also be realistic about the role of fiscal policy in the future. What kind of fiscal policy are we going to have to use in the future? When the Maastricht criteria were designed, the fiscal policy were the bad guys. It was all about fiscal stabilization. This is the textbook fiscal policy in the 1990s when the Maastricht criteria were designed. We are now 30 years later, and we are experiencing two once in a lifetime crises where the fiscal application was absolutely essential. As Lex said, monetary policy is overextended, so it will not be able to do much in the future. When we are faced with the next pandemic or whatever crisis hits us, what is the macro stabilization role that we're going to have to use? Who's going to have to do it? And in the context of that, the role of fiscal discipline becomes even bigger. It's not smaller, it's actually bigger, because then the threat of interdependencies becomes big. So, when you think about redesigning the fiscal rules, it's not that there isn't good reasons to redesign the fiscal rules, but that doesn't mean that we need to throw away the rationale on which that they were based, which is exactly what Lex said. It is the issue of the fiscal discipline. The important thing is to do it in a way that you're also going to have a credible macro management in the future, in particular, since monetary policy is not going to be able to do much. How do we deal with the future macro shock?
I see a Sudoku appearing, a very difficult one, with high debt levels, high ambitions for investments. We don't want to have the fiscal discipline that we had a couple of years ago, where actually economies couldn't invest anymore and the economies fell further back. Danielle indicated that Germany will show solidarity with the EU, but not with the eurozone. I'm not sure whether all of this adds up to a stable eurozone. In the context of convergence, and we're running out of time, but is the Commission in principle able to supervise the semester? Did it do a good job? Can it supervise reforms, adaptations, and the budgets in the member states? Very quick answers, and I'll just go. I'll start Maria, Danielle, and Lex. Very quick answer because we're running out of time. Can the Commission, when we reignite the Stability and Growth Pact, can the Commission do it?
So if I go first, the RRF for Italy has got 550 deliverable points. Right, the Commission is going to have to monitor just for Italy 550 bullet points on deliverables. So go around the 27 countries and you're in the thousands. That's very, very difficult, I think. We need something that's much more workable, much more credible, and actually sustainable in the future.
So Stability and Growth Pact, and we need a budget. Maybe a footnote for the Dutch perspective. We had something similar as the RRF just at the national level. And almost all the projects that were presented to the Dutch government did not receive any funds. Whereas, as far as I can see, the RRF programs that member states present to the Commission get their money, unless in the case of Poland and Hungary. Danielle, the position of the Commission, Stability and Growth Pact, can it do a good job?
the Commission can do a good job, but that's close to irrelevant, because in the end, it's member countries which decide. It's always the the Council which takes the final decision. Remember 2003, the Commission proposed to start imposing fines on Germany and France and Italy. And of course, they found a majority not to do it. So yes, the Commission can have a public relations exercise and say, no, we don't like this and we don't like that. And they can marshal some arguments. In the end, it's the Council which decides, the member states. Member states, what do they do? If you are nice to me, I'll be nice to you. So in the end, they all gang up on the Commission.
Sorry, Danielle, but that was the Commission as the guardian of the treaties. These days, we have the Commission as a political commission. Does that mean that?
I totally agree that even if the Commission were a true guardian of the treaty, it would be powerless. On top of that, to make things even worse, as you said, we have a political commission. And of course, that takes away even the vestige of, let's say, technocratic authority, which it might have had in the past. And therefore, I wouldn't count on the Commission to be very decisive in imposing convergence or anything more in detail on the RRF implementation.
Lex?
I think I agree with what Daniel said, and let's say combining it with the question that Maria posed, I think twice, on what will be the instrument for macro stabilization or crisis combating the next crisis. That will be EU fiscal policy via temporary funds. There's no other way of doing it, given where we are at the moment.
Now we're talking about it. Can I ask briefly your question?
Whether let's say the monitoring works or doesn't, I think it's inevitable. There's nothing else.
So we will get a transfer union with temporary funds on a permanent basis, if I read you correctly, Lex. Will that be acceptable?
That's what I expect.
Will that be acceptable to Germany, Danielle?
As I said, it will depend on whether you can tell the German public that these transfers are needed because of shocks for which the other countries were not responsible. Right? And if that's the case, like it was for Corona, you can make the case for EU solidarity.
Am I reading you correct that Germany will want the ESM back as the strict supervisor?
If it is needed, and I expect actually that it will be needed sooner than we think, yes, I expect that unless, of course, all countries go into debt overdrive, then it becomes difficult to pick out the sinners. But if that's not the case, then I think Germany will say, okay, you got into that problem because of your lax policies, you got to change them.
Maria, please, you were first.
And it's because of this, because if the greater fiscal capacity is inevitable in the future, because there isn't anything else, the case for fiscal discipline at the national level, it's even stronger.
Okay. Is this a win-win situation? We can get we get the temporary funds and we get the ESM with the strict conditionality back. Is that a win-win situation? Is that a stability and solidarity that will save the euro?
So if you're asking me, I must admit, I don't like the word solidarity as a basis for building strong relationships and sustainable relationships in the future. You can give solidarity once, you can give solidarity twice, but that's not sustainable in the long run as a partnership. The EU is a partnership, so it needs to be done on solid grounds, not on solidarity grounds, right? I mean, you need much more than that. So I think this is a win-win because you have a macroeconomic stabilization tool, that will be the fiscal capacity, but you don't do it at the expense of national efforts.
Lex, a few words from you, and then I'll give the final floor to Michel Heijdra. Please, Lex.
Let me refrain from those words because I was going to repeat what was already said. So let's turn to Michel.
Michel, we've heard a lot about the future governance of the EU, of the eurozone, but we also had some basic problems of how it will get together. What is your view on the outcome of this panel?
No, it was a very good panel, and in the end, we also saw at least convergence on the problem description. So that was, I think, very useful to see. And I think all panelists came more or less to the conclusion that there is two fundamental elements. One is the national budgetary positions, which will be a key discussion in the coming months with the SGP review. And the other one is how to bring reforms or competitiveness closer, also in relation to a potential European further fiscal capacity. I think two dimensions were not mentioned, and they could help solving a little bit of your Sudoku, and that is a discussion on the quality of spending. I mean, the amount of investments in national budget has decreased significantly. So why is that? And is there a possibility to turn that around? And the RRP helps a little bit in that regard, but can we also make that more fundamental? And the other element that can help to solve the Sudoku in some countries at least is that private capital markets are still very much underdeveloped. And I mean, even in the climate transition, for every €1 funds fundamental toward this investment drive to get going to also help the private sector find its measures. So finally, on the recovery plan, I think there in the coming months and years, we will have, I think, three key discussions that also relate to what was discussed in this forum. The first is, the plans were difficult, but probably looking in hindsight, because we now get to implementation, and we will have all the implementations and payment decisions. So indeed, will we see the reforms happening? Will the supervision on them be strict or not? And what will the council do in these kind of circumstances? That is, I think, the first crucial element that we're going to watch in the coming months. The second element is there, how are we going to repay the Next Generation EU funds? In a way, we've set up a fund, but we have not yet discussed how to pay it back. And the Commission would come forward with a proposal in September, but it has been postponed. And all the new own resources that have been proposed to pay back the Next Generation EU funds run into trouble. I mean, the ETS runs into opposition from the Eastern European countries. The digital tax is yet to be finalized. And it's a question whether that's really a stable own resource. The carbon border adjustment mechanism is criticized by Germany. So it's difficult to see how we're going to pay it back. So this is a crucial discussion in the coming months. Yes, it's easy to set up money or fund, but how are we going to pay it back? And it also says something about the future of Next Generation EU. And I think what people sometimes forget is the Next Generation EU funds are super senior to national budgets. So it's impossible to, and they rely ultimately on the AAA guarantees of 5 or 6 member states within the European Union. You cannot double the Next Generation EU or triple it without bringing into question the AAA status of some of the member states, especially when there's no clear way of paying back the Next Generation EU loans. And then ultimately it comes back to national budgets, and they will be constrained. There's no free money. European money is just national money being collected at the European level. So in a sense, that will not bring us out of the woods, but hopefully quality of spending and reforms will do so. Thank you very much.
Okay, thank you all, the panelists, and thank you the audience. I think we had enough time. We have enough material to discuss for another hour, but time is up. I want to thank all of you from the panelists and from the audience. Let's end on a positive note. Yes, there will be a next crisis, but we will also know how to solve it because there will be budgets. We feel the partnerships for different ways. There will be conditionality in the ESM, so we have a package. It's just, and maybe even that is also a good point to end. We do not worry about how to pay the collective funds back. Maybe that is a strength of the EU, or maybe a weakness. Lots to talk about, lots to think about. For the Eurozone, our next panel is at 1:30. And I can warmly recommend that panel. It's about leadership and narratives. It will be chaired by Duncan Robertson. He's from The Economist. On the panel, we have two former speechwriters from the European Council President, that is speechwriter of Donald Tusk, that is Hugo Brady, and Luuk van Middelaar, who was the speechwriter for Herman van Rompuy. And on the panel, we also have Saar van Buren. She's now from the PES, but she used to be the advisor from Frans Timmermans. So a very important topic about narrating and leadership by key people who've really sat in all the rooms. So you're very welcome to join that panel on 1:30. Once again, panelists and audience, thank you very much. I thought it was a very interesting debate about Europe, and I learned a lot. So I hope you did too. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Bye-bye.